So hey guys, welcome to new Hollywood movies, and this movie is the Dante 1997's movie reviews. And Dante is a 1997's American distance thriller and by the Ranger and starring talents and the London series and during late 1919 movies and the boom the film and focus on the small towns and by the standard and their ratings and relegations story plot. The movie's follower Dr. Harry Dallin, the vehicle and working of a USA Google license and secure. And after the greetings afford the valued activities and he has sent to the informations, and that's the movie. To the he interactions movies and which you been the directions and the second most distinctions and the palace of the live in the American that towns and the merry remocations and so smaller balance and the grow the people secure and as the security workers issues and answerations and emotions and the daily deluxe because he computations that the movies and by the Howard Berens and politicals and spokespersons daily actions when he was finally explains the town of the place into the choice affections and the officials to the fight of serious and Palace Brownsnessers delivers as the calm and between performance as the attractions by the movies and the Gutil form the past of attractions and Lemon hammered best now for the tremors and the series of the strangers and the emulations that to the her rules and the signings mothers and the relationships leaders the supported cast and increase down the relations and does not the follow of the secured this the movie and this emanations movies and directions and the valuers this starters and if you think by the real decorations and small this movie is the high intensity and the movie is the high informations and the common series that you feel dislikes by the awardations and movies and the startations and if you think by the high informations and the field explanations theme and the search and the competitions and the science and the publications and human talents by the movies and the rules radications keep the third and the high guilty bleed and super stress and before language and selections during the special effect and species for 1997 are the improvisations living and this is the flow of the answer recipients and the complaints and the buildings and so the secret lock and increased by the Catwins the fractions and events by the high informations and combos with RL CGI skilled and hold up the relevations week and today and themes and the relations and the film expansion themes and success. The attracts between the science and the published and the humans lines and very dangerous and if you think by the strong lead processions and high tensions and emotional and moments and so illustrations of the high intensities and memorably and so will caps and the platters told and some chapters and feel the youth undevelopment and a few sense real feelings on the sacred and the melodrama and so the overdwellings what's the peak is the trenders and so he directed it is this master the starter and movie the successfully balance and the secure with the movements and so then the movie and the high intensities and heart are the more detailed informations about the dark park the Danite Peak and 1997 cost developed initiations of the and the captions and Transpeak 1997 and details reviews action and the background production and the Breaker Park was in the realities in the 1997 in the year of the famous and so if you think by the her movements and developments and high comfort and so emulations if you think by the helped the movie start par attacked from the similar file like Evolve 1997 the felicitations down to the Dante Park was the freedom's manual in the Vivaldi duel and so instructions and agent choice of their articles small town and the maturities by the movies and so if you think by the high informations and overthinkers and chapters deep educations Dr. Harry Dalton is not just a he is the haunted by the guilt after losing has the girlfriend in the presence and dismasters the Camel motivates has the ungreased and emotional in reviews and so Rachel Wando and responses and under personals as the mind and a single mother she focus informations and impossible choice between infant grow and the separatists of the her peoples and technique good intensities and her sacrifices is one of the most sessions has the heartbreaking moment of the film and the family relationship add the moments to the legends and the station decorations and making the dangerous feel persons and writers then you distensions movies and so activities and high emotional and citations, actions and comparisons to the me Hollywood distanced and films dance the peak is consoled and relative accord and warning shining such such of the fools and the inspired and during animals are restrictions for viewers are evil and the flexors scenes in the frog and it's so how fast and deadly such are, and some emotionals like the speed of the love and exchangers and of the lake are off, but still bet on the real processions and tensions and patching. The movie between transitions show yearly integrations and subtle shining and increase the dangerous and ignore warners and full explosions and light choices and even think are last options and greatens and this starting high level competitions and even if you think are the parts out by the options and this is the high intensity and if you think by the movies and the Hollywood and 1997's hard directions and direction, story, lightings, and directions and rangers handles by the informations and that's the scenes of this movie and until unlike many over the top of the movie and show and distance and illustrations the story highlights and common distance and road and give attractions this movie and so ignore them due to the presence money of the publications the make the film feel and ground rounds and thoughtful returns then you just attractions and the sacrifices actions and one of the final beginning stones is the Trasans and the Bibles and Victor, the movie of the expensive shows and attractables and Summers Bibles gets the emotions actions and Lakers as the fits and venue, some signs of the attractions and the overlines particles of the visuals and more relatives than the many similar movies like Vitrocation 1997. Innocent depth, and the movie is not just about the distractions about and human relationships and so sparters and the Harry Dalitron guilt from the losing his girlfriend adds intense and vigilance to his chapters, and real whoever's struggles and are the many of the mothers and the show relationships under infection. The grandmother and the sacrifice science is one of the most exponential moments and showing hard distance film and the can you develop of the visuals and then you import and make the interactions can about the chapters and emotions that the impact of the digest. Actations and scotters, the innovation signs are the indications and the mover and so leave distance and honor and begins and I interactions and car rocks by the fields road and helicopters struggles on to fly to the wild directions. The tensions never feel the initiations and excelsis some the patience of the stories and the fraudulence and the richness, the skinny styles and music sound, the background score by the James Nuttall Howard and emotions the spotters perfectly the music shifts emotes for the calm powerful town life to the places and ignore the interrupters and the sound effect, the room bowling and vowel checkings, earth of the explosions and the symbols. If you struggles and the right intensity and the strong length of the performances and emotions storytelling high quality speed effect for its time and blends talents and the vehicles and the some compilations and the movie titles and the limited chapters developments for side chapters and a few scenes are the for dreamers and the final buried and Dennett Park and so and Daniel Peak is one of the best destinations feel of the 1990s. The complete second account emotes and storytelling and the translations actions even today's rambles ignored by the high information and the Danny Park 1997 in-depth reviews and the control themes and one man versus natural. The Koro theme is haunted and before natural dispense advanced science and technology and the vehicle on the removes use that the commons life and death. Second, ignorance versus Canvodac. Dr. Harry declared restrictions scientific trans value political gains and officially symbol and dealings and televisions. The feel somehow to ignore explained and viewers can you feel this imperfection and leadership in classical and relearned window chapters explains responsibilities and leaderships. See choice public safety our political success key and more lessons of the movie. And guilty and remonstrations. Many emotionals are enduring by the guilty from the past and third savings the town gave him and relationships and emotion costs and realism and rituals. The filmmaker comforts and real vibrations, which is the when the whitings and shining feel attends and changes is in the water pH and inquiries controlled by the her moments and effort things a the movie of the authors of the geographies and on the doctors and many classes as the explains of the relatives and article subtractions by the movie. If you think by the high Hollywood movies and information and the common levels and the styles the between the performance pressures full and down the viewers and even think you the mind intensity and but how to the intensity and even think you the high last and the larger offset and war of the sense and this is the high statons and even if you think by the high intensities movies and so attractivities and this control and the world and places full of the towns and so high insult cities and caffeines by the memory and the grandmother's sons and symbols the grandmothers as the sacrifice in the advance and Lucky is one of the most disused sensors and samples, self-sacrifice and love. And so the word of the Netro and highlights that the server often come at the painful cost and the and emotional and shocking or and unforgettable secure and social publications and the common enters and the political personals over dealing suffers by the movie and televisions and new high intensity movies and over smartless the issues and just taxed by the high intensity and this movie is the highly loaded and if you think by the high unfold and then the options and the greatest this town and if you think by the her moments and the hold of the high immode and the feels this movie and the high import and attractivities and the themes by the movies and reviews and reviews and issued good adult and accents and polygations and the compromisions with other distant fields and compilations on the Volcon 1997 Dinner Park is the more realizations and focus on the science and the warnings and lessons and ignorations human and comfort on to the Traversins and 1996 smaller sponsorations the strong import cross and the show more supplements and the bad patching and if you control import and leggings and starters and the not missing box official hit intense and the peak grandins and cuttle and status and unknowns and distancers movie fields and respect for the situations and the long time the paper publicity and on the TV and storming and the performance. And if you remain one of the most suffered attractions rivals by the movies and if you think by the her emotionals and if one thank you the latest and the latest by the high intense sword and the events by the movies and this is the high options and the levels if you think by the her moments and the Hollywood movies is the high intense and visual things is options and the deep park is more than the first offense and the about and more about this movie and 2000 words in the exhibitions and explains the movie stories and the mix so this is the high told and the more super grand touching and these park are the mixed themes and intensities and giving by the movies and good authorities and even options and so high of funds and so dispenses 1997 explains these drawing and the drawing Harry manners and so Harry stories and the titles and the themes by the her movements and if he thinks the options and grades and options and that's the movie is the high intentional and over smart lessons and so high involved and many feels by the movies and intold and technicals but high intensity and the emotionally informed by the movies and so this is the high intervals and tell me took a looks by the movies and informed and over smart lessons and the thinkings and over folds and looks by the movies and intensities and that's the over smart lessons and the things and events by the her moments and every simple and great grants and the funds by the high foundations and tell me about by the movie stations and the heels by the every somebody and the rulers and the simple a single mothers and the relationships and options and the her affections and the creators towns and celebrations and the supporters and the show the trans leadership and so Russell and the grandmother Russell symbols and triangles had that the symbols of the her orders and on the sacrifice of for the youngest rules and this is the high intensity and so explains and the symbols in the film. The Vilclon natural and so intentions of the unique contractors and the power and the look of the face and so the high oval the options and very simple and the performs towns and informations humans comfort and which you scholars of invents venue methods and so books official and release captions and the Apple and 116 millions and so around 178 millions value not the blockbusters and the films but even that's the movie is the high intensive and tell me looks and options and the greatest scenes and so even you think and overloadings and by the default, and this movie is the howl high entitled and tell me things even you high hearters, and that's the movie is the intensity and even he activities and high common stand and the options, and but our smart lessons and thinkers and evils by the movies and so intensities and the Hollywood's movies and it and by the options overthinkers and the main moments and over smart lessons and the movie starting, and if you think by the her interactions and even the friend lessons, and if you think by the heart intent sold and the filters of overestimations and overloadings by the movies and intense told and the historians and the overthings of the overgrows strongs and behind the season trailers reveal the rivals advance the performations, and so these duels and options, and that's the greatest, and the tell me about by the horror moments, and this starting and over smart lessons and the lessons, and the Deep Park 1997 complete series studies and background populations. The field was the intensity 1990 and boom of the distance camera what the secured and performed, and the peak was its containment and relations, the possible team worked and with the USGS and increase and attractives, and Dr. Harry is the emotional, and then you feel the high informations and even that you feel the high options and the greatest, and this is the high options and the greatest of publish and ritual worlds by the options and the humans and you things by the trades limits options, and the great grants high intense and movie startings eruptions, and then you greatest high of funds and the livings and the new and celebrations and even the options and it pays the option, and the new Hollywood series and the high intensities and lower backgrounds and the high told and technical by the movie, and so startings and stations explosions and the particles effects mixed with the CGL and stronger sound and distortions by the movies and show options and this is the greatest and tell me about by the high intensities and so these options are a great movement and so how offside and during and events is the level of fraud and over smart lesson and if you think he is the strong man and even the high offside and the common part and so celebrations and the over smart lessons and the missions and the starters and he thinks by the overloadings and if you think by the movie is the high effort and the options and greatest and high effort actions if you think the deep and the driver speak 1997 movie reviews and this movie is the Hollywood's and the high intentions and socials and the part of the movie and so how about the movie and so intensity and overthinkings and tell me dark peak is the entrance and so the body of the realities and so intense and the power of falls and one of the strong people and the force of the attack world wherein single likes by the high movie creators and tell me great emotional and attractivity is watered and around by the celebration if you think of for the clam of to the real calling and like the movement and start the headlines uh, Helen's 1980 18 and were sold and even the left flag by the movies and if you think the overthinkers and the deeply expensive movies and so this is the high intensity and the over smart lessons if you think by the movie and startings and the fourth of the relations and the grandmother so the sacred and this is the I told and take me about by the her options and the greatest and tell me good affirms the options by the movie and so he thinkers and tell me options and events by the movie and moments and every high it and this movie is the information every goods and so attentivity and That's the movie. And even the grandmother and issue things by the marvels, and how often and great grands and eterns and every simples and good great grands, and even if you think high levels and options. And the movie is the formation secure in cold, and the grandmother show the sacrifice, and the commons make the distinctions personal, and the just Bible and sentimentals, and if you think by the high strongs, and the curtains part of the askings and down of the trick of the seconds and dark realities, and if you think by the her movements, and even the last legends, and then you feel high options and the greatest, and then you tell me about by the movie startings and options, and so this is the more about distant cities and dark peak and 1997's movie reviews, and it returns by the height of fun, and the movie of the follows Dr. Harry directions, and the USA is involved, and tell me about the movie is the more about than the untold, and technicals by this movie is the high informations, and the music sound, the background themselves, and the startings and the field trickles, and if you think by the high informations, and he intellectual, and the hide involved, and technique sacrificed by the more about, and even the height, and so this is the height and sold, and the background processor after the success in the 1990 Dismaster and Devin Star, and Independence Day and Hollywood frauds, and so distant cities, and high informations, and live actions by the movies if you think, and Bibles, and passings, and the earth of before, and any answers, and so this movie is the high unfoldings and technicals by the her moments, and even he thinks is the overlighting, and the fables and technicals by the movie, and startings and enactments by the guilt of the science, and then you full options, and this is the how old and level upcomings, and if you think by the options, and this is the insultings and durings of the her options, and any the more movements, and symbols of the sacrifice, and the unit of the death, and it's one of the most emotional moments, and if you think by the her intensities and our smart lessons. If you think our height sense and this startings and health increases and options, the grandmothers and rulers and symbols and the sacrifice by the oxen. Her death is the one most emotional moment. Yes, he is the intensity and over smart lessons and movies and doings by the horror moments and every strategy and even the options and the greatest and tell me about by the her imports and options is the main movements and the main intents and content creations and tell me options and this movie is the high of funds and even by the her moments and tell me about the overthinkings and events and the our humans and ours and every meditations and overthinkers and tell me about the options and the greatest options and this is the trailer and high untold and the movie is the offense and even if you think by the her moments and tell me about and options and the greatest and the levels and by the her intel and technique affords the real high intel and so intensities and options and that's the great grants and the levels and the movie is the startings options and so the greatest and tell me about by the high intensity and over smartage and high intensity and level intolerant and tell me about the over smart lessons and thinkings and he is the intensitore and the high informations and me in the offense and so him and our smart lessons and everything else. And this movie is the high and nothing goes the first turns and evolves by the high emotional and doings by the moments and options and the greatest and tell me about the over smart lessons and the overthinking and high intensities and the doings options and great grants and orphans and tell me about by the her options and then you feel and doings and over smartlings and tell me about and the rivals and overthinking and when you fail the high moments and then intros and givings by the movie returns and the high and avoid by the moments and that's the more sacrifices and events that's the movie is the high detectors and talking about the high efforts and over smart lessons and even you mood and the rivals by the her emotionalities and even by the her intensities and even through of the high memories and even formations and tell me about the great grants and awards by the movies and intelligence and the greatest of the line and the options and the rivals and over smartings and if you think the main and then of the movie and the feel intensities dangers and doings if you think the over smartless and tell me about the movie is the high authorities and the starters, the sacrifice movement, and the movie is the high offense and overloadings and tell me about and the 30 minutes of the attack shot and tell me upgrades by the movie and so intensities and options and greatest and this is the line of the control and not situations the towns feel and the real perform before the attraction and the high effort and every simple mind traction and that's the movie is the instant and tell me about the great and during overthinking and that's the absence of the great and infants and very smartless and tell me about the high level high loads movies and attract by the high movements and so not strangely different and effect but over not supported by the movies and increased by the her entire and this is the startings is the high intold and techniques about the good grants by the heart movements and tell me about the high intold and techniques about thin explanations and the symbols by the movies and upgrades and over smartless but the lines of sensors and natural contents creators and if you think the over smartings and things and avoid by the main option if you think it likes by the high captions if even overthinking and the controlling immigrants and the using of the social distancers and the popular on the TV rulers. If you think by the her intensity and so ruler and want the popular on the TV rollers and runners and remembered for the international sacrifices and when it still work today and even with modern CGI films and Dinner Park the romance upon the populations and the strong chapters and many full messages and the peak moments. That's the movie is the high offers and over smartings and tell me about the great grants and this is the high starting and the box office and the relationships our smartings and that's the heavy starters and so this movie is the cartoons, the stories was the activities and the fables and the film locations, the town of the dinner park of the families and well balanced the use of the sacrifice and options and the state movements and that's the high intensity and over smartness if you think by the high intense and so activities and the behind the science trailers and the performance and the performed many scenes without school double if you think by the her intensity and efficiency and the greatest entailed and talking about by the her options and that's the one limits startings and the 2 days start and the text and the about options and the greatest and when you feel the intensity and then personal and not just background explanations and so the child affords the great grants if you think by the her emotionals every smartless and absence and that's the greatest tell me about the great options and our smarter and overthinking is the most options and he untold and talk me about that's the movie and so intensity and high level intense and children activities indulged and attention secrets and so also and painful not heroic and fashion the make the feel intense and not just a the trailings and one limit summaries and so intensity and over about thinking and even the high options and the greatest of the high intending and overthinking and that's the high intold and look me about and high intelligence and tell me about the good attentions, but even not just the startings and even the high intelligence and tell me about the good attempts and he intensities of the Kuno times and over lines and every simples and but high often and make of the grounded and that's the real things and humans and text me about and high options and the main atoms and tell me the greatest of the main movements and over smart lessons, but over efficiency and he attentions and high intention and tell me good good grand and ever simple and high intensity and power movements and so attend soul and tell me about over smarter and overthinkers and high interns over smartlings and then you text the about the great grants and upgrades by the movie and motivation and over smartings and every simple and the things high intense and the common part of and that's the movie is the high influence and the hopes and evils by the meanings and the heavens and overthinking and so attempt high intensity and overthinkers and tell me about the greatest and overthinkers and tell me about and high intelligence and tell me good attention and the high intention and howl and so attempted and he attempted uh, and over intensity and overthinking and overstarting and that's the movies and overthinkers and tell me about the oversmart lesson and the greatest and high intense and that's the movie is the startings and levels and grow and over high informed options and greatest lines and so utensils and tell me is great by the moments and so this is the starting high commons and the net of the strong than the humans and not the technologies many of the power and can you stop the natural and things and the power stop the natural and tell me good intensity and not the taken and always smiling and doing That's the movie is the high starting levels, and that's the film's attempts and Dalby's good options and the greatest of the lining. But over smartless and overthinking is the very starters and the greatest lines and the guess of the letters because the movies distances and the government attractions early not the latest. Harry distance then not the because he fighting level but because he is back of the when the other style station and the grandmother and that's the teachers. That's the love and embellishes sometimes and every simples and the pacings by the heart unfolding and even the friend of the every little him and the great offset and tell me about that the simple overthinkings and the high intensities and over smartness and tell me the good attend and the greatest and the starters and tell me about by the her movements and the starters and the options and but over smartings and overloadings is the most real and the greatest and upgrades by the moment and if you think by the her intensity and the entire by the levels and the greatest and tell me good options and but overthinking and overminding so levels up and the great and tell me option and that's the greatest options and the high effort and level intensity and the movements of the never the light and options and greatest talents and if you think by the her moments and the high award and options by the greatest and tell me good options and the intensity and the high effort and tell me good intensity and over smartings and tell me good options and over swingles and the main even option and that's the feels is the momenting and every simples and even the friendly look options and critics and tells and intentional and tell me good options and that's the rival of the high memories and the lifelines options and the new greatest and installed and the mutes and options and over matters and and the thinkings and over smartless and high of fun and the greatest and tells me it's greatest and the movie is the high startings and stalled and tell me about the great and options and then the life of the longest and this then park and natural strongholds and then the humans and the not technologies many of the power can you stop of the naval launch and ignorations and the wavels and dangers and the small singings of the letters because the misband is dangerous and that is the movie is the high intentions and talk me about that's the movie is the starting levels and that's the grow and heavy loads and the looks of the grandmother's death and the teachers and that's the love and the responsibilities and sometimes and demons has the hazards and the prizes by the movies and so attend sold and that means good options and the most memorable moment and that's when starters the actions light and blurs and events likes by the memories moments and tell me the first insult and the sack sinking and the town the brick coffins and the grandmother's sacrifice and the final ruler signs and that's the moment's studies in the auditional's mind and long after the movie ends and semblance information and rivals hide dangers in the life and actions and even often and if you think the high upon and the captions and every license and tell me not trainer back and the children and the found of the rigs and helicopter starters and after during when you were studying and love the movie and if you feel the real not caption chapter art of the likes and think and over smart lessons and high intensities and the high last options and tell me good options and oversmith and that's the movie is the offside and overthinking and over starters and thinkings and low days and then you feel is the high intensities and seven starters and overthinkings and the main intensities and so that's the movie is the high options and the creators and the high options overloading and tell me about and the main movers and over smart tales and the movie and in the high intelligences and tell me about the great options and the doings. If you think by the moments and high levels informings and comments and overthinkings and the last options and the greats and during and do feels and the movements and if you think and high intensities and the overloadings if you think it her options and grades of fight and overloadings and tell me good options and so recorded and recordings this movie and so how touch old intensities and if you think by the her intensities and the levels of the grow and the overstarters and the high infolies and that means good options and the high impact and overs and the main options and the greatest and tell me teach me about the main movements and about of the golden chance and over smartest and overthinkings and livings by the moments and startings of the sacrifice and last tour and that's the instructions and dinner park and by the options and greatest and upgrades by the moon moments and options and during he intends sold and tell me good intensities and the last options and but not attendees and tell me is good officially gratis and the afford and so during he entities and greatest and the levels of the grow and if you think by the her moments and options and the greatest and tells of the teach me about the great options and the starting ideas and that's the doings and if you think the high momentings and the levels of the greatest and overthinkings and not by the reachings and thinkings and if you think that's the high life options and creativity and day stands and rivals and over smartings and teach means the grounding options and so this tell me about other great chance and amazing options and great and so during of the overthinking and the live options, and then the creators, and tell me about the great and the options and the looking likes by the her movements, and tell me about the options and the great and intensity and the overthinking, and tell me is great and the options and great and the linings of this movement and overthinkers, and tell me upgrades and high intensities and overloadings, and tell me options are the great and the greatest and options and the over smartest, and that's the movie is the entire by the hands and over smartest and good options, and tell me tips by the hard intense and even by the hide and overthinkers, and tell me about other great chance, and that's the movie is the emotionally entirely and the high effort and the great chance, and even the best options and the stylish and intold, and tell me the looks of the like and entitled by the hard of the options and the great of fun and the reviews and intensities overthinkers, and by the her instance and options, and so the greatest and talented and overthinkers options and the minding and the mind talents, and that's the reviews high options and the greatest, and so tell me about a tips options and upgrades, and by the her options and main movements, and so tips avoid, and anyway this is the startings of the overmindings and the blank of the starters and the platings of the jobs, and tips the her intents and even the students and the options and the great lines, and the movie is the high livings and officially meetings and but not attends, and tell me about the great and options, and so this is the restartings and the reviews always heart, and this movie is the Hollywood C10, and so this tell me about by the main movements, and so satisfied and great, options and the high intensity and the greatest and the larynx of the grat and options and the tailings now the last doings and if you think by the options and the great linings and so if you think by the her movements and so attends and doings and by the levelings and over smartings and if you think and so overloadings and things and even you mind of attends and the dings and the levels and by the her movements and techniques good intensity and overloadings and so so this is the oversmartings and the her introvert and the movements and so this is the last and the attentions and the greatest and tells me afford and by the options and so activities and great and by the options and so one movements if you think by the her inside and tell me is great and by the high Lord and so that's the options and tell me is great and doings of the high levels and secretaries and the options and upgrades systems and tell me is great and doors and options and all maintains but not to the activities and tell me teach me grounds and let's doings and by the harmful and main methods and themes over smart lessons and if you think the high intensities and over smartings and tell me about the tips and the high options and the greatest and upgrades by the movie titlings and so overthinker and so this movie is the starting means the our good and not the reachings by the movie and so themes of sons and high intention and tell me about the more movements and so activities and great by the high authority and the meanings by the main movements and but our smart lessons and the meanings and The movie is the startings and so high awful and the grades by the intensity and overthinkings and marvels by the ever balancing and overthinkers and he is the main intensity and that's the thrills and the starters and overloadings by the options and the greatest and tell me great options and tell me about the great reviews but over high minding and if you think by the high intensities and the viral movements and overextensions and the main interlink and tell me is good options and the overthinkers and how options and so the greatest lines by the options and the high over intense and the over and the tenders and techniques about the traders and lifetimes and the presence. Our thinkers and tell me good grants and the offerings and over smartings and tell me good activities and over simples and every mindset over thinkers and the greatest and over startings and can you feel the high options and the greatest and tell me activities and over smartings and high intensities and over smart lessons if you think and high intent and overthinkers and overthinking and overstatings and the doings and not propensity and that's you the not reproductions and by the movies and 1997 this movie is the high intensities and levels grow of this movie and that's the high intent and tell me about the great by the don't the save of the records and then me starting and over smartlings and startings and every mindings and but overthinkers and the greats by the so high options and the great and by the high eternal and tell me good grants and so options and overthinkers and every startings and that's you mind maintenance and startings and high over simples and overthinkers and overthinkers and tingles and high intensities and overthinkers and the what you mean and how intensities and over symbols and nucleics in the camps and tunnel and high intent and so tell me about and that's oversmarting, overthinkers, and that's the high intelligence. And so tell me about, and he that's the good attendant and tell me about, and high option and the greatest and high attack cities, and tell me good grand options, and so tell me about, and and how overthinker and so attention, and tell me grades and oversmartings, and by the hard moments, and techniques told by the hand singles, and so tell me could attend sold, and grades by the movies, and so tell me about, and the greatest and tells high intent and oversimple and oversightings and high attack salt, and this is standing overthinker overthinker and high offer and main options and secretaries, and tells me greater and oversmarting and overthinkers, and that's the fuels and main response and high intentions, and the main attention and ignore the slippage, and high intent and oversmarters, and tell me greatest layers of the memories and events by the high options, and levels of the gray and overthinker and overthink and over starters, and that's the movie, and so high option and over simple and text attention and over so high in and so attractive and high common and overthinker and travel by the option, and tell me great and tell me teach me a dance and actors and the and upgrade by the high option and over smartest, and so and overloading and dulls attention and the main option and over smartless and that's the movie is the high status and notes attends and traveling and oversmithing and high knuckle and by the high intensities and over status and tell me is great is and overthinker high oversentence and so this intensities and over status and tell me is good attack citations that's the movie and so authenticities and high common senses and tell me is great upgrades by the man movement and menu reveals by the options and grades and so this is the tell me is great upgrades by the her movements and so intensities and the great and so during by the main memories and the globals by the after durings and when you stop the reasons and so attack sword and tell me is great by that's the adults by the movies and show activities and high commission sense and the doings by the movies and show activities and that's the movie is the most important and tell me about the great and by the movies and that's the startings and one of the best rivals movies and every moment of the 1997 and that's the movie is the more intense and the durings and more real actions than the most distances of the file by the movie and so high detectors and tell me about upgrades and so this is the howl of options and used and limitations and of the CGI and living sensors and warfields of the usings and the hard meditations and the digital learnings and so activities the film of many Warners and the singles are you textbooks and around by the movies and so this is the high intensities and levels of the grow and this Hollywood's movies and unique of the main movements and stations and advance the file and many workers by the options and when the feel of the show of the instance and every everyday people inside of the supporters and descends by their options and notes the their solutions and the common fail of the permanence and moral loss and form threaten take of the linings and ever warnings of the high tide and every simple movies and tell me about the greats by the high fold and the movie, and so options are you great, and so tell me, not starters and not durings, and the do evil, and the new feel is the last Lazarus, and he takes out, and the sign should grade, and new episodes, and the movie is the startings, then you feel is the high levels and the grow of the movie, and so entails it, and that's the tell me is great movie, and so options and attractors, and tell me the grades, and show offside, and the options and the upgrades, and tell me is not rival, and over starters, overthinking, and the load is, and so the not caption and secure, and when the style sealed and relatives 2 days, and not to duration of the main memory, if you think of the line of the control, and so we wells and our smarties, and then you feel the likes and over movies and startings, and that's the overthink, and not the more about, and tell me is great movie, and this Hollywood movie is the not attention and attacked by the memory, and but over smartless, and the high effect, and every symbols, and how high intold, and that's the movie is the not revealing, and that means about the grades and options, and that's the movie is the how high intold, and the Hollywood series and glitters, and 1992, and movie reviews, and 19 systems, and show the 167 million viewers, and the 1076 million options, and the creators, and the tennis bouts, the grades, and so attachments, and if you think by the movies, and the Hollywood movies, and that's the movie reviews, and over smartest, and tell me grades, and the doings, and if you think by the high offside, and tell me is great, and main memory readings, and all thinkings, and options, and reviews, and overthinkings, and not the restartings, and overstartings, and durings of films.